We are very, very honoured this evening on that Thursday thing to have a special guest join us. That gentleman is Richard Marson, and we shall say hello to him now. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for joining us on that Thursday thing this evening. I was having a little bit of a look at your kind of resume and what you've done over the years, and you have had just a brilliant career, haven't you? Sort of Blue Peter, producer and editor, working at TV.
No, I've been very lucky. I can't complain.
You mean you started back at Television Centre in the late 80s, didn't you?
That's right. Yes, I started as what they call a floor assistant, which is the sort of very junior job in production, where your main responsibility is to get the artists on set on time, get them through makeup and ready to go when they're needed.
A pressurised job, I should imagine. Lots of people
shouting at you.
Shouting in your ears, and where on earth are they? You've also written, so we've got books on Blue Peter and Upstairs Downstairs.
That's right.
I have both of those Blue Peter books, I hasten to add.
Oh, hurrah! Brilliant.
I love them. I'm a bit of a Blue Peter fan of many years standing as well.
If you've got the second one, the one that's the sort of archived one, then you must be a fan, because I think that's very niche.
It is, yeah. I love it, though. It's great to flick through, because I can spot all the things that were filmed in Cornwall over the years. So,
plenty of things were filmed in Cornwall, because Edward Barnes, who was the head of children's programmes for many years and was one of the original producers on Blue Peter, always had a house in Cornwall. Still does have a house in Cornwall, and so they were always filming trips to Cornwall.
Yeah, there was a special one. I always remember the classic is Leslie Judd trying to get on the lighthouse.
Grab me.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, yes, it was very, very hairy for her, that. So the last time I saw her was for the 50th anniversary in 2008, and she still talks about that now and says that, she can have a kind of white-knuckle moment just by thinking about it.
Yeah, I've seen it quite recently, and, yeah, even sitting on the sofa at home, it just comes straight through the screen at just how...
Yeah, there's no health and safety then, you see.
Well, what a difference exactly these days. Just wouldn't happen, would it?
No, although I think they still do some pretty amazing... I mean, Helen Skelton, the current female presenter, I think she's done some amazing things for comic relief and children in need and things. These challenges like high wire walking across Battersea Power Station and stuff like that. So that's all very much in the same tradition.
Yeah, I mean, she is kind of the real hero of the latest Blue Peter, I think, because, yeah, like you say, she's absolutely fearless, or seems to be, that she will get out there and do anything. If
you've got the kind of guts and pizzazz to do those things, of course, they are the most memorable things, so it's a very good career move. Absolutely.
No, I'd like her a lot. One of those sad things, I do still tune in occasionally if I'm home.
Well, quite right too.
But, I don't know, it seems to still appeal to me as an adult, which is kind of strange.
I think always Blue Peter's had this strange ability to attract a cross-generational audience, so, it's the kind of... It was always meant to be a show that kids could watch with their parents, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, and I think that's possibly why. And everybody has their era of Blue Peter, so it kind of has a sort of powerful nostalgia.
I think for Aid and I, it's definitely the 80s, isn't it, Aid?
Oh, yes. So your presenters were, Simon, Janet and Peter?
Starting off, yeah, Sarah Green as well. I just remember Sarah Green doing it before she went
young.
Just before she went on to start on Saturday Superstore. Yeah, I remember her doing that. So, but yeah, we kind of stuck with it right through, because I think at that age as well, it had a slightly wider age range. So,
well, I mean, of course, in those days there were only 3, then 4 channels, so you were still getting audiences of 7 million, which, is phenomenal by today's standards. The idea that 7 million people would watch Blue Peter, that's extraordinary, really.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think of the move? Because obviously it's not that long now since it's moved from BBC One to only being on CBBC. Do you think that's a natural thing for it to happen?
I think it's natural and inevitable in that, if you've got a dedicated children's channel, that's the obvious home for it. But what I do think, and I've said this before, is I think it's a great pity that there isn't a sort of shop window somewhere in BBC One's schedule, perhaps on a Sunday tea time, to show the sort of the creme de la creme, the occasional Blue Peter special, the dramas, one or two of, some of the stuff that they want to just kind of wave under the noses of people who are not the dedicated children's audience, because there is a danger that if it's not there in the kind of within reach of adults who perhaps haven't got children, they'll then forget that it's there. And you do need the movers and the shakers, the sort of politicians, the money men, the high ups at the BBC to be really aware that this stuff is still going on, and it's really vital.
Absolutely. So sort of a tea time Sunday thing would be kind of a good slot.
That's the thought, these things would have to be, certainly for the drama, because I think drama is a crucial part of children's output, always has been, really good quality storytelling that isn't stuff that's just brought in. And I understand that, Blue Peter still do, I don't think you could, put out every episode, but certainly there would be specials and things like that. And I think there are other really high-quality kind of factual programmes that CBBC do that deserve a wider audience.
Back to Blue Peter, what do you think about the move to Manchester? Do you think that's a strength? Or
Manchester was a long time coming. I think I first heard about it in 2005.
Wow, a long time ago.
I think, from a personal point of view, I did think about going, because obviously as it was mooted when I was still there, and I think you have to see these things in terms of an opportunity. Yes, of course, the real issues are, do you get the same calibre of guests? I mean, I think Breakfast Time probably had the bigger, shouldn't call it Breakfast Time, it's actually just Breakfast.
Breakfast, yeah.
I think they have a bigger issue there in terms of guests. I mean, there's something that seems slightly bonkers about taking a show that really does rely on being in the capital to get the best guests and uprooting it and all the rest of it. And there was a bit of that with Blue Peter, but in theory, Blue Peter could come from anywhere. And of course, there was always massive filming all over the UK anyway. I mean, I guess the issue was the studio, and at the time that I left the programme, the studio was suddenly regarded as much less important. And from my understanding, and I very, very rarely see it, but my understanding is the studio is now much less of a big deal, and that's to do with money, really, because a big studio like TC1 at Television Centre, it's not cheap, and then you've got to fill it, and the whole idea of that was to give that audience the spectacle, the big studio spectaculars that were, going to give them a kind of a dash of show business or drama or whatever, and that feeling of it's happening live.
Very much so. I love the episode they picked out to show on the same night as your Tales of Television Centre programme.
Oh, well, that's nice of you to say, because they phoned up, the BBC4 schedulers phoned up and said, we're not sure what to show. And of course, because of this ridiculously encyclopedic knowledge I had, I thought, I know just the episode that will go with this, because we looked at it with a view to maybe using a clip, and I thought, actually, it's a perfect episode to show again.
It is, isn't it? It just shows off the magnificence of Studio One so well.
In Europe, as it used to be.
Absolutely superb. I mean, what do you think about the Television Centre in terms of its location? I mean, for us here, in that way that, Blue Peter came from a studio but was always out and about.
Yeah.
I think we, as children, never really saw it as being London. We just saw it as being Television Centre. It's where telly comes from.
That's interesting. That's a good point. I think certainly for many years, even before I was on Blue Peter for 10 years, but there were a lot of people on it for 30 years or 20 years, and I think there was always a kind of race memory or race idea, if you like, that we shouldn't be London-centric. That the home was the Blue Peter studio, and that was important, but that there was a huge amount of effort and imagination put into every running order to try to make sure that the show didn't feel like it was, London was where it was at. But by the same token, I think that there wasn't this kind of fear of London being, there wasn't a kind of political correctness about it. It was like, well, at times, this is the capital city, and that can be exciting to that audience. You can say, this is where lots of amazing things happen, whether it's John Noakes climbing up Nelson's column, or whether it's opening the doors and, kind of hundreds of kids coming in for the Christmas show,
That was always my favourite bit.
Oh, that was lovely. I directed 4 of those Christmas shows, and they are among the most magical memories of my career, because it was obviously a kind of hard work and all the rest of it, but it was such a lovely atmosphere always to do it.
A friend of mine showed me a very old one the other day from way back in the early 70s, and it must have been TC1, and it was just the most amazing shot they did. It was incredible. They tracked with one camera from the audience coming in, they panned around, got the whole of the audience in, pulled back, still on the same camera, right the way across Studio One. It was incredible.
I went to the Goodbye Television Centre party last week, and they had 1,500 guests, and it was done a sort of ballot, you know, so it was a mixture of current staff and ex-staff, and I was bumping into all sorts of people who'd worked there long before me, and people who were still there now, and all sorts of... And I was talking to some of the camera guys and saying how they had this incredible skill set, and I think a lot of that came from drama, because, you know, they'd done so much live drama that they could hold these really long shots where there would be massive issues about focus and stuff like that. But that skill, because they were doing so much stuff week in, week out, you know, it wouldn't have fazed them. It might have been tricky, but they'd have liked that challenge.
Yeah, you could see that on this particular shot.
Was it a shot looking through the studio doors? Because the thing that you always got a massive brownie point for on Blue Peter, if the studio doors were open, if you could see a tube train bundling in the background, that was always regarded as like, you know, yes, tick, VG.
Yeah. Going back to that little party you sort of went along to the night, what did you think of Television Centre now? I myself went a few weeks ago and it was looking a bit dowdy, shall we say. Well,
it's always been dowdy. I mean, I first went there in the 80s, as you say, and it wasn't exactly aesthetically gorgeous then, but it certainly had it's always had an atmosphere. When I went back, what I was amazed by is that they turned 3 studios into the sort of location for the party, but you were kind of free to wander around the rest of the building. And I have to say I laughed when I saw there was a report in the paper, or some of the papers, about, you know, carryings on and drunken behaviour. It didn't really see much of that. Most of what you saw were people kind of wandering around taking pictures of themselves in empty corridors and, you know, pointing at bits that they remembered. And it was like, I said to one of the people I was there, it was like the crappiest theme park in the world, but it just had its own special, you know, it was wonderful by the same token to be able to have that last chance to just wander around and, you know, really just soak up the fact that so much stuff happened there, and whether it was in your own life and career or whether it was stuff that you remembered, it had some real meaning.
Yeah, I mean, I'd never worked there, but I did do a piece on breakfast television there back in the late 90s, and it was that sort of walking in through the doors, it is kind of like a religious experience.
Yeah, you have a frisson, don't you?
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, I'm here.
Yes, I think I always had that. I think if you talk to many people who either came there like you did on that one occasion, or people who worked there for years and years, there was something about going through those gates and, you know, all the rest of it, that it just had a special something.
Did you notice there were lots of pieces missing off the walls?
Well, yes, but, you know, I don't really understand the hoo-ha about that, really, because most of those signs are pretty manky, and they were all obviously going to be ripped down anyway, and either skipped, or I don't know what they were going to do with them. So, you know, the idea that there might be a roaring trade on eBay, I suppose, with sort of way out signs and things, but, you know, the signs that were covetable, which have pretty much long gone, were the original, you know, the original font and the sort of Bakelite backings. They were nice, but I'm still not sure I'd really want one in my cloakroom.
No, bit odd. Yeah, I noticed there were little things like just the arrows with room numbers 100 and whatever. Those are gone. Really weird little things.
I think people, it becomes, go back to the playground, you know, it's like if one person picks up a pebble or something and says they're going to collect that, you know, a little craze can start. I suspect a lot of those bits of nicked signage will be in people's bins before very long.
Probably. Right, Richard, we'll take a quick break now, and we'll have a little bit of Grain Chill, because that's a classic TV
Can't
theme.
go wrong with that.
If ever there was one. And then we'll come back and have a quick talk about your book about John Nathan Turner.
Fab.
Indeed, we are going live this evening on Penwith Radio, That Thursday Thing, with Aidan Jules and our special guest this evening, Richard Marson. Right, Richard, I think we have a book to talk about next.
Hi, yeah, here we are. I was enjoying those couple of themes. The Going Live one makes me feel slightly tense, because I worked on that a couple of series, and I still feel the gut fear, you know.
Isn't it funny how things, you know, like all those years later, 20-odd years later, and it still gets you, doesn't it? Those
completely.
Associations never go away in your life.
No, it's like there's a Dee Ream song, you know, the things can only get better.
Oh, yep.
That was the first pop number I ever directed in a multi-camera studio, and if I hear just the opening bars of that on the radio, I feel like throwing up.
Yeah, it's quite an extreme reaction, but understandable. Right. Should we have a chat about your book, Richard? Because that one, let's be honest, it's hit the headlines a bit this week.
Yes, it's been quite a week.
Yes, I was, because obviously we talked about this interview last week.
That's right.
And the reason I wanted you on, because obviously I know your work and saw the book was coming up and thought, there is the ideal guest. Wasn't expecting to see what followed.
No.
But I think it's probably fair to say it's really just one aspect of the book, isn't it? There's a lot more to this book than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's obviously been lost in the furore is that this is a proper, serious biography, by which I mean, that sounds a bit pompous, but by which I mean it's taken a year to write. It's the fruit of not just 110 interviews with primary sources, but it's also, there's a huge amount of other research in there. And it was really an attempt, because I'm a huge fan of biographies, to talk about John throughout his whole life from beginning to end in the most complex terms possible, in terms of detail, in terms of, obviously of warts and all, but also of being compassionate and understanding and trying to kind of work out, well, why was he such a polarising figure? Why was it that some people can still be contorted with rage when they talk about him, and others will be tears of affection and, reminiscence?
I mean, certainly from my point of view as a fan of Doctor Who, unsurprisingly, I kind of was looking for a book like that, because he gets a lot of press, certainly if you're a Doctor Who fan. There's so much written about him, and certainly with the DVD range that's come out as well, there's a lot about him, but to me it's always felt a little bit one-sided, because obviously he's not longer with us.
That he died when he did.
Exactly.
He died on the cusp of the DVD starting, and in fact he was due to record a commentary for the Leisure Hive, which never happened because he suddenly got much worse and was rushed into hospital and died. And I think he only contributes to one DVD in the form of an interview. But, if he'd been around, even if he'd lived for a few years longer, I think you're right that there would have been a different slant, and a lot of the things that, I felt it was time for a re-evaluation, on all counts of his career.
Absolutely. I mean, also, just thinking about John, I mean, there aren't many television producers who actually have a profile. Not in the way that he did, especially at that time, because producers in those days kind of did a job, whereas these days...
You have to remember that John was a frustrated actor. He started out as an actor, and he was quite comfortable in the limelight. And I think anything that he thought helped to sell the show, or to get it out there... and he was also very pally with, as he would call them, the gentlemen of Her Majesty's press. So, he became pals with them, which is partly why I think, he ended up in pictures and things like that. And as you will probably know on TV, if people find someone who's willing to talk, they tend to come back to them. So, he turned up on a Saturday Superstore, and then we'll have him on Take Two, or we'll have him on something else. So, it became a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Always remember that clip that's almost embarrassing to watch on Open Air.
Oh, that's quite a clip, isn't it?
Whoa,
quite right.
He gets
BBC eating their own.
Yeah, he gets a proper grilling from fans, using the term slightly loosely, I think. But yeah, he really does get it there.
It's an interesting one, that, because, it's all part of that long tradition of sort of points of view and right to reply and all of those sort of shows, but they're always slightly stilted and uncomfortable, and it's sort of impossible in that setup to have any kind of real dialogue. I mean, I did watch that, and I do mention it in the book, and it's sort of, it did feel very one-sided, I think.
One thing he certainly is responsible for, though, is getting a real interest in the US, which I think is something we really should be grateful for. Oh yeah,
he was ahead of the game there for sure. He certainly realised the potential. I mean, I always, my theory, if for what it's worth, is that if they had really wanted to move him from Doctor Who, the show, making the show, the perfect job for him would have been to go to Enterprises, as it then was, and be given proper responsibility for selling not just Doctor Who, but perhaps other BBC titles. I mean, nowadays they have a whole division devoted to selling the format of Strictly Come Dancing and other shows like that. And John would have been a wow at that.
I mean, he was also ahead of the game. I mean, he never really left the show, did he? Although the show stopped, he's still continued a strong association with it.
Yes.
But things like the video specials and things he released were actually way ahead of his time.
Well, I guess so. I'm not sure I'd entirely go along with it being way ahead of its time. I mean, video had got into its stride by then, and I felt that some of the work that he did in that area was kind of obvious and sometimes a bit tatty. But I certainly think that his vision of how you could get product out there that fans wanted, and there is no doubt. I mean, you look at the range of material now. I have no idea how the market supports so much stuff, and most of it's very, very good quality. So, you are sport for choice, but he was certainly ahead of the game and saw that before anybody else did, I think.
Yeah. He had a good career before that, of course. I mean, we know him for Doctor Who, but he had a good, long BBC career, didn't he, leading up to that?
Yeah, he was very much seen as a coming man, as a man most likely to, and he was himself very ambitious. I mean, he was a young producer, not the youngest producer, because Verity Lambert was that, but when he got the job, I mean, he wanted to be controller of BBC One, and up to that point, a lot of people thought that he might achieve that because he raced through the ranks, and he showed enormous sort of ability at all the kind of production jobs. Of course, his Achilles heel, which became more and more of a kind of problem, was that he didn't really have much in the way of a narrative sense.
Yeah, I've read that somewhere before, that really he understood production, but the narrative and that very much fell to kind of the script editors.
That's right.
To develop and bring writers forward for the show.
And I think it was always hugely frustrating for his editors because, I mean, perhaps it was slightly less so for Andrew Cartmel because by that point I think John had got to a stage where he was so beaten up by it that he kind of just thought, well, you know what, I'll trust this guy. And I think that Andrew did have a very clear vision. And of course he was only having to, I say only, he was having to fill 14 episodes a year rather than 26.
Yeah.
Which took some of the pressure off. But I think that, it was tough for those editors because really they didn't have the partnership that perhaps had existed, certainly with producers like Barry Letts and Terence Dix, who were really kind of supporting each other.
Yeah. Well, dare I ask your kind of overriding thoughts about John? What do you think of him, if you could sum him up?
Oh, I mean, I used the word complex earlier, and that's because the more I got to know him through the book, the harder it is to sort of sum it up in a few lines.
Yeah.
So, without waffling, I mean, I have enormous respect for his work ethic and for his passion for that programme, and for the fact that I think he didn't give up when many, many other people would just have said, you know what, I've had it, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And there may have been a few other reasons why he didn't do that, but I think by and large he was such a workhorse, and I do admire that. I have empathy for the fact that I think he had a very, very tough time in terms of his management, in terms of how he really didn't get much support in the last 5 or 6 years of his time. And I guess, there are things about him that I liked in terms of his pizzazz, the fact that he did try to sell the show. He had, the idea to do the 5 Doctors and Longleat and things like that. There were sort of show-busy ideas that I thought were great. Where I would have quarrels with him, where I think he had poor judgment in terms of some of his relationships. I think he wasn't the deepest thinker about people sometimes, and I think that as a result there were casualties. And I think he did have a habit, which is very common, not just in television, but in anywhere that's a pressured environment, of, what's the phrase, throwing the toys out of the pram.
Yep.
And that sometimes meant that, he would back himself into a corner and then, make silly decisions as a result of that.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to reading the book because I have a great interest in it. So,
well, I really hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure I will, because he, like as you say, complex character, and that always makes for a great biography anyway. And it's one I've been hoping for a long time. And I'm glad someone's taken the job on after all this time. So.
Well, I'm glad someone's actually going to read it.
I will.
Rather than invent a few things that are based on supposition.
Exactly.
People, when they get the chance to read it, will see, I think, that there's a huge amount of story in there.
Brilliant. Well, that's JNT, The Life and Scandalous Times of John Nathan Turner by Richard Marson. That's out in May, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll be certainly out by the end of May, but probably nearer the beginning, I think.
Fantastic. And I can't pronounce, is it Mork, M-I-W-K?
Milk. You have to say it as though you're a small child that can't pronounce the word milk.
Brilliant. That's available in bookshops, and they have an online store as well if you want to go and have a look along there. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Richard. It's been really, really interesting.
Pleasure.
And we're going to play it with another tune that might make you feel a bit tense. Got some Top of the Pops for you this time.
Oh, fabulous.
All right, so thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.